This is a reaction to Gary's latest video, which is about whether Reform is going to win the next election. And so, roughly going point by point through Gary's video, the first is that Reform is about 55% to 60% to win on the latest betting markets. It depends on which market you're going to look at. And so that reflects what Gary said in his piece. And there's a lot of different markets and odds makers. So there is some manipulation for the casual bettor or the professional bettor if they want to get the best odds. But it's still pretty accurate overall to say that the market thinks that Reform is going to have somewhere between a 55 to 60% chance to win. And then as for Gary's analysis, he predicts that Reform is going to win. And I also predict that Reform is going to win. I think that Gary's logic is extremely solid. And also his experience as a derivatives trader is very solid in this as well. Just bet on the economy doing worse. I think that for all of the reasons that he stated, Reform is very strong favorites to win. Now, it's not that there is zero chance for Labor to win, and it's not like there's zero chance for Conservatives to win, particularly with first past to post betting or first past to post voting. That would mean that there is always some chance for weird things to happen. There could be some sort of way that Conservatives and Labor split the vote so that some other party wins more of the vote, even if they didn't get a lot of it in the first place, just because they were running in an uncompeted lane. So those things could happen, but I think that the most likely outcome is that Reform would win the most seats. Now, to the next part, which is what can Labor do to win? This is roughly where I have my largest disagreements with Gary. I think that the first strategy that Labor could do would be to pass a wealth tax that Gary suggests. This doesn't work because then once Labor passes the wealth tax, they can't run on passing the wealth tax again. So unless they're going to say, well, next time we're not just going to pass a little wealth tax, we're going to pass a bigger wealth tax, it is sort of tricky to see whether the wealth tax is going to be good for Labor politically. The second problem with the wealth tax is that passing the wealth tax does not magically make the economy stop doing worse. If it did, then Gary could suggest this. He doesn't. I think that there is some arguments that Gary makes which are about how passing the wealth tax would give more money to regular people and boost the economy. It does give more money to regular people. It doesn't necessarily boost the economy. It is a much safer bet that even if a wealth tax would get passed, it might cause NHS to have less funding cuts. But it's still not going to stop the economy from getting worse. And then once they pass the wealth tax and the economy gets worse anyways, once there has to be budget cuts anyways, then people are still going to be upset with Labor. A different strategy that they could do is not pass the wealth tax and then run on passing the wealth tax. And this is what Gary suggests, and I don't think that this is a good strategy. And the reason why I don't think it's a good strategy is because if they were going to pass the wealth tax, why don't they do that right now? Because they have all of the seats in Parliament in order to pass a wealth tax. There's nothing stopping them other than themselves. So if they can't pass a wealth tax in Parliament now, they're not going to discover the will after the next election to pass a wealth tax. And if they do, the voters are still going to sort of distrust Labor, saying, oh, well, we didn't pass the wealth tax when we could because we wanted to run on it as an election issue. I don't think that's going to fly with enough voters that they wouldn't win the next election just campaigning on a wealth tax. And so I think when it does come to the wealth tax, I think it's a bit of a no-win situation. Labor can do good government, and maybe that involves passing some sort of wealth tax, and some sort of group of people who like good government are going to reward them for that. But are they going to be rewarded so much so that they actually win the next election? I would say no. And I think that Gary would probably say no as well. My suggestion is for Labor to move right on immigration. Now, Gary says that moving right on immigration doesn't work because reform dominates the issue. If Labor moves to the right, then reform will move further to the right. The thing is that if reform moves further to the right, that's good for Labor. If reform is more extreme, then that gives Labor more room in the middle to say to regular people in the UK, hey, we understand your concerns on immigration and we represent you the best, rather than the people who are so extreme over there that you can safely bet that reform is just going to be so extreme that normal people aren't going to want to vote for reform. And so if Labor moves sufficiently far right on the issue, then like if they like, for example, like close refugee hotels, what is reform going to say if Labor closes the refugee hotels? Reform has to pick more unpopular deportation policies. Now, there are still a lot of other deportation policies that are popular in the UK that reform could pick up on, but if Labor consistently picks away at the most popular anti-immigration policies and implements them themselves, there's less reasons for people to vote for reform. And so it reduces the salience of immigration, it reduces the salience of reform, and this gives Labor more room to talk about economic issues like inequality, like whether there should be a wealth tax in Britain. And this space is created because immigration is not as sensitive of an issue. And I think this sort of divide runs into Gary's idea of finding common ground, like ruthlessly pursue common ground, because compromise is a two-way street. If Gary's idea is everybody who agrees on a wealth tax can all get together in one tent, that includes a lot of people who are pro-immigration and anti-immigration. There needs to be some sort of compromise in the middle, and that compromise would necessarily move Labor right on immigration. That's sort of how big tent politics works. This is totally okay. I mean, if Labor has to grab enough reform voters in order to make reform not win, then they're going to behave more like reform. This is sort of politics working as normal. I think that if Gary is pro-immigrant and is unhappy that he has to compromise on immigration, that's totally fine, but he can't have it both ways. And I think he wants to have it both ways, and sure, I want to have things both ways too. But this sort of compromise is normal and is something that we can see happens in other countries with similar politics. You can see an example in the US where RFK Jr. endorsed Donald Trump, and then after Trump won the election, Trump made RFK Jr. The head of the U.S. National Health Department. And maybe for viewers in the UK, it might not seem that weird, but RFK is very unapologetically pro-abortion. And this is not the position of the Republican Party that Donald Trump was running under. It's not the position of most of the people that voted for Donald Trump. And so you had somebody who was running the health department that decides whether abortion is legal or illegal in the United States to a certain extent. There were a lot of Republicans that wanted to use the health department to litigate and make illegal certain abortion procedures, make abortions harder to get in the United States. But because RFK Jr. is running the health department and he's pro-abortion, those things aren't going to happen. And this is sort of the nature of compromise, is that Republicans brought in RFK Jr. Into the fold. They brought in millions of voters that came along with RFK, and they won the election. But once they won the election, then they had to make some compromises on health that they didn't necessarily want to make. But that's just sort of how compromise goes. And so I think a similar thing could happen with labor with wealth taxes, where labor can get a big coalition. Labor can focus more on economic issues and be less leftist in their immigration views and more centrist in their immigration views. And yes, of course, this would move them right, but if they can pull in enough reform voters, then they can, they would certainly be more likely to keep parliament. And by the way, this is what labor more or less is doing, is that they're sort of, tippy-toeing into the anti-immigrant direction. That's really, what their strategists, what they're like, not just their voters, but what the neutral people, the people that actually are going to be deciding the next election, what those kind of voters are saying. And so I think that labor is sort of making tippy toes in the right direction. I don't think that they're making decisive moves that cause them to win the next election. I think that to sort of wrap up, we've been working under a paradigm where as long as labor doesn't do anything weird, as long as the incumbent party doesn't do anything weird or nothing crazy happens, they're going to win the next election. And so they just want to keep things as predictable as possible. I think that because the economy is consistently doing worse for regular people, for regular voters, for most voters, they're going to reward parties that want to do something differently. So if labor wants to win the next election, they're going to kind of have to do something crazy. And that's really against the character of labor. And so they're probably not going to be able to win by playing it safe, by keeping the character. But if they can just be crazy and do something out there, maybe passing a wealth tax is that crazy thing. That would be something for labor to seriously consider, where if they can just change the narrative, do something sufficiently different, then maybe they have a chance in the next election. But I think based off what they're doing right now, which is sort of try to preserve the status quo as it erodes all around them, I don't really think that they have much of a chance. So do you agree with this take? Let me know in the comments below.